keep them in line over there. You ready? Mine says
My watch says 5.
mine does too.
His son just graduated.
Okay.
He's worked at this.
Yes. Everybody ready? Are we ready?
Okay.
The dad, the son, like I said, the son just graduated.
Are we ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Okay.
We're ready.
Okay, good evening, everybody. The time is now 5 p.m. And this time I'd like to call the Tuesday, August 13th, 2024 scheduled work session to order. And Ms. Emma?
The statement of board mission is Spencer County Schools, together we can make a difference for all students. And then our vision statement, Spencer County Schools will challenge and support all students to become highly effective individuals.
Thank you. Welcome to our visitors. Looking to see if there's anybody but us here. If there's anybody who wants to address the board, please fill out the blue sheet, give it to Michelle or me. Review and adopt the agenda. We've all had a chance to review the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the scheduled work session agenda dated August 13th, 2024 as presented?
I'll make the motion.
Pam, do I
I'll
have?
second.
Lynn, thank you. All in favor? Unanimous. Let's move on. We can skip citizens and delegations. There's no one signed up to head on down to presentations. Dr. Foster.
Yes, ma'am. Last year, I think it was my second board meeting, Mr. Murphy agreed to do a pre-tax hearing presentation for you guys, and I think it was time well spent. So he is prepared to do so tonight. He'll talk to you about the timeline of the task that we are faced with in setting our annual tax rate and really some options for you guys to consider. So he's here to share a wealth of knowledge with you. So Mr. Murphy, if you could join us, the floor is yours, sir.
Almost see a reflection of my slides.
Is your microphone on?
Yes. All right. Gwen Schaus is here. She's our Director of Accounting, and Gwen has been very helpful in compiling this information, helping me to compile the information. So I just wanted to acknowledge her. Thank her. We are preparing to enter into probably one of the most important things in the financial realm that you all have to do during an entire year. And so I think it is time well spent for us to all get on the same page and understand what it is that you all have to do, what your options are, and when they have to be done. First of all, we received the notification of the property assessments on August the 6th, I believe it was. You have 45 days from that point to levy the tax rates. The plan is for that to be done in 2 weeks on August the 26th. So you'll get that done in plenty of time. I know the county clerk will appreciate that because it does put her in a bind the farther we go in this process toward the time that she has to get tax bills out, because they have to be proofed and printed in plenty of time for people to have an adequate amount of time to take advantage of the discount, which I understand that, and that's only fair for the taxpayers. So, but what we're going to try to do is to sort of demystify some of this task and make it less of a thing that you don't really have all of the information necessary. And I did get you the information in advance this time. I know last time you wanted that. So we're also going to look at tax rates that have been levied by adjacent and regional school districts. Like we did last year, they have been updated. We are going to look at historical rates and assessments in Spencer County, and hopefully that will aid you in setting the tax rate in a couple of weeks. So, good. So anyway, as I mentioned, the statute gives 45 days from the date of the certified assessment, receipt of the certified assessments for the rates to be set. If they're not set by that time frame, then the rate automatically becomes the compensating rate. So we'll go into all of those different options, but just understand that the compensating rate would be a significant difference between what you might want the rate to be versus what it's mandated to be if we don't meet that timeline. So the most common rates, as you see up there, are the 4% increase rate. And I do want to emphasize that that is the 4% revenue increase rate. It is not the rate that is 4% higher than it was last year. It's the rate that will produce revenue that is 4% higher than last year, or 4% more than the compensating rate, which I'll talk about in just a second. So that 4% was established back in maybe in the 1980s. I believe Julian Carroll was governor, and I may be dating myself. He probably was in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. But he went out of the country, and the lieutenant governor stepped in and brought that before the General Assembly. The General Assembly voted on it, and ever since then, governmental entities have been restricted to 4% increase over the previous year's revenue. And that is what it continues to be to this day. The second most common rate is the compensating rate. That is the rate that will produce the same revenue as the prior year. This is we'll look at the number of districts that typically adopt these rates. But these are the two, these are two of the three most common rates. The third one is a little sort of out of order because we need to address it now, but it is a rate between the lowest and the highest rates that are possible. So it can even be higher than the highest rate, which is an option available to boards, but it has to be properly advertised. And it is subject to recall petition. And there are certain laws and restrictions that go along with that. The least common rates that are much less rarely adopted are the Tier 1 rate, the House Bill 940 rate. And that rate is the lowest rate you can adopt and still participate in the SEEK funding formula. So it would be devastating to a district to not adopt at least the House Bill 940 rate. But even that rate is done very, very seldom in Kentucky. The subsection 1 rate is confusing. At times it can be higher than the 4% rate. At times it can be lower than the 4% rate, but it is the rate that produces no more than the prior year maximum rate would have produced, whether that was adopted or not. Again, the subsection 1 rate refers to a portion of the statute, and it is adopted very, very seldom in the state of Kentucky. Probably less than five districts adopt that rate each year, and probably the circumstances just happen to be right for them. The other consideration that I put on there is the exoneration allowance. You may recall from last year where we talked about this. The exoneration is the optional levy, but highly recommended, not necessarily levy, but add-on to any levy to offset lost revenue from the prior year. You will recall that, that there is a local effort that is required with the SEEK funding formula, and that local effort was set at a level assuming that the revenue from the previous year would have been collected. For various reasons, some revenue is not collected because of tax bills that are exonerated, and meaning that the taxpayer does not pay those. And by not adding that exoneration allowance onto whatever rate is levied, then the required local effort has a double whammy effect on the district because it's artificially higher than it should have been. And the board has the ability to recoup that to offset that impact. You have a document, it's a front and back document or a 2-page document, just called Tax Topics. We have already sort of covered the first page, so I won't go over that, obviously. If you will refer to the second page for this slide and for the next slide, we have listed several or some types of property, and the taxes on these types of property are considered ad valorem taxes, which means the tax is based on the value of the underlying property. And so real property is all land within the state and improvements thereon. Personal property is property other than real property. Doesn't get too specific, but it's broken down further as tangible and intangible, and you can see some examples of those various types of property. A third type of property is Public Service Corporation, PSC property. And this is things like rail lines, gas, water, electric, and pipeline companies. Certain other things are excluded. One of them refers to multi-channel video programming services. That was a loophole that resulted in lawsuits that spanned probably 12, 15 years. And it was finally resolved by the state collecting these taxes. And you'll see that if you have any kind of satellite service or whatever, you'll see that added onto it, but it's collected by the state, and we receive that payment once a month from the state. Another one is motor vehicles. That is any type of property that is a motorized mode of transportation on the public highways of the state. So sort of common sense, but it is a significant revenue source, property tax revenue source. A couple of other things that are not actually types of property, but sort of various properties that impact the categories above. You've got new property, so residential property that adds, increases the value of the property by 50% or more. Any addition to farm property and any addition to commercial property, those are all considered new property. And additions, new property is a figure that considers additions, but it also considers deletions. And I have seen elsewhere where that number can be a negative number. So new property can actually be a negative number. It's concerning when it is, because the new property has basically come to a halt in order for that to be the situation. New construction is property that's been under construction and it's added to the assessment totals when the construction is 100% complete. And then the last thing on that page that we won't go into are a few definitions, but I would draw your attention to required local effort. I mentioned that a while ago. School districts are required by statute to make a uniform tax effort equivalent to 30 cents per $100 of assessed property value. And so there's various things that can be adopted by a school district in order to make that local effort be at the right level. And here we have property tax and utility tax. We don't have an occupational tax for the school district, although there are occupational taxes in the county. And there's also excise taxes on income, which we don't have in Spencer County either for the school district. But those are required to meet the 30-cent local effort. So we will look at a situation about that in just a few minutes. Again, the utility taxes have to be collected by the state and remitted to the district monthly, and that's called a utility gross receipts license tax. So it's not an ad valorem tax. So on the next slide, and stop me if you have questions, or we can do it at the end, either way. On the historical levies, these tax rates are all per $100 of assessed value. So you would take the assessed value, divide it by $100, and then multiply it by the rate that is shown there. So you can see that the real estate tax levy has ranged over the past 10 years, has ranged from 60.1 cents to 65.2 cents. And you can see that last year and the year before, the tax rate was set at the lowest level that it has been in the past 10 years, at 60.1 cents. All of these rates include the exoneration allowance. You'll see on here, sometimes I will say it excludes, and when it excludes the exoneration allowance, that's when I'm drawing a comparison to another district, because I don't know what their exoneration allowance is. So I want to keep the field level, and so I pull it out for Spencer County as well. The tangible, this is, I believe, the last slide that I show tangible rates, because the revenue that's produced from tangible property is so much less significant than it is from real estate. So typically in recent years with Spencer County and with most other school districts that I've looked at, the tangible and the real estate rates that are allowed are identical. And that is not an automatic, so I just want to point that out. You can see that what was adopted in Spencer County for tangible has not been the same, but the allowable rates have been pretty similar for all school districts that I've looked at. And a couple of other things I wanted to point out. The property and utility taxes, I took a look at that a while back. That is approximately 30% of the general fund budget. So what you're doing tonight, setting these tax rates, is making up approximately 30% of the district's budget for the general fund. Okay, the next slide takes a look at the adjacent school districts compared with Spencer County. All of the adjacent school districts last year levied the 4% increase rate. You can see that Spencer County levied a rate that was less than the 4%. It was only slightly less. It was very, very close, but it was slightly less than 4%. And that's what the state shows in their ongoing data, is that Spencer County levied a rate other than the 4% or the compensating or the subsection 1 or House Bill 940 rates. They don't say that you were 1/10 of a cent less or whatever, but they just show that you levied a rate that was other. So in fairness, that could have been higher than the 4% rate, but that's just how they denote it on all of their information that's on their website. Spencer County, as you can see there, is lower than all of the adjacent school districts, with the exception of Anderson County. and Spencer County ranks. Looks like I started to have sorry about that last column. You can mark through that. At first I had the tangible out there to the right, and the writing got so small, I thought I better pull something off of here. And really the tangible is sort of irrelevant. So I apologize for that. It's the one right next to the rate that is the state ranking that relates to real estate. And you can see that Spencer County ranked 92nd in the state out of 171 school districts. The next slide takes a look at the 14 school districts that are in OVEC, in the OVEC region. 8 of the districts last year levied the 4% increase rate. 6 districts, including Spencer County, levied a rate that was less than the 4% rate. And you can see there that Spencer County at 60.1 cents was 13th out of 14 OVEC districts, higher only than Grant County, which levied a rate of 56.8 cents. The next slide gets into an area that I don't think we've spent enough time over recent years talking about, and that is the levied equivalent rate. The levied equivalent rate measures a district's taxing effort. You recall I was talking about just a while ago the required effort at 30 cents, but this is a different measurement. It puts districts on a level playing field regardless of size, population, or other factors, and it compares the real estate, this schedule that I've got here compares the real estate rate ranking to the levied equivalent rate ranking for the 14 OVEC school districts. You can see that Frankfort Independent and Anchorage Independent, those are at the very, very highest. They're ranked number 1 and 2, both in OVEC as well as the state. I don't think that was the case last year. I think one was number 1 and one was number 3. And I think Anchorage and Frankfort Independent sort of go back and forth. It's not an automatic that an independent would be at the very top. You can see Eminence is about in the middle of the pack in OVEC, and about, well, they're ranked 66th in the state. So not that that's our benchmark. I'm just saying that an independent typically will be somewhat higher than a county school district. So the calculation of that, as it says up there, is a district's total tax revenue divided by its total assessment, including both property and motor vehicles. A couple of things that I noticed in looking back and forth with the previous slide, Carroll County and Gallatin County, they went up from being tied for 77th ranking up to 10th and 43rd respectively in this levied equivalent rank. That likely is due to an industrial base that they have that we do not have in Spencer County. And so that is probably a factor in that. But the opposite can be true. Bullitt County went down from 41st down to 72nd when you look at the levied equivalent ranking. And Shelby, Owen, and Henry went from the 50s to the 70s in the levied equivalent rank. So it's really hard to draw necessarily any conclusions, just how Spencer ranks with its peers in the OVEC region as well as the state. And again, Spencer County ranked 92nd on the real estate ranking in the state and 124th when you're looking at the levied equivalent rank. Yeah. All right. The next slide starts looking at assessment history. The current year's property valuation is one billion $1,961,017,530. Comparing the property valuations for the past 7 years, that's up about 712 million, or about over the past 7 years, it's up 712 million, which is a 50%. And we have seen that, and that is what has allowed the property tax rate levied to be reduced as over the past several years. One other thing, net new property. If you focus on that, which is the last column on there, last year was $77.8 million in net new property. This year, it's $14.4 million. That is a significant change, regardless of which direction it is, up or down. You can look at past recent years, and you don't see that kind of swing in either direction. I've spent quite a bit of time over the last couple of days looking into this, and of course, we all know about the Spencer-Shelby line issue. And from what I've found in talking with the PVA locally, as well as the PVA in Shelby County, there are 118 properties, and give or take some, because I know this is a in flux sort of, but 118 properties that have shifted from the Spencer County rolls to the Shelby County tax rolls. And so that number is reflected in that net new property, because remember, it's a net number. So that decrease is offset by increases, but it is there. What I have been told by the PVA in Shelby County is that those properties, I don't have that figure right in front of me, but I believe it was $33.1 million. That's correct. The $33,111,000 for those 118 properties. He said that he did not reassess those properties. He took the value that the PVA locally had on the books and, took that sort of at face value. And so, that's a real number that we're going to be impacted by potentially for a significant amount of time. And I'm not sure if the biggest hit is this year or if it will be next year when we really feel the bulk of the impact, but we will definitely feel it this year. All right, if we look at the property tax options, first of all, the top line there, the orange line, shows last year what was levied. You can see 60.0 on real estate plus the 1/10 of a cent exoneration allowance, so 60.1 cent was levied last year for real estate. Tangible was 61.5 plus the 0.1, so 61.6 cents. For all of these other rates that are shown here, they exclude the exoneration allowance. But again, I would highly recommend that you adopt the exoneration allowance. You can see at the bottom left of that slide, for this school year, the allowance is 0.2 of a cent. So there were more exonerations last season than in the previous one. That amount is expected to generate approximately $39,000. And if you don't think that's a significant number, because we're dealing with very significant numbers, just think what a teacher or a school or whoever can do with $39,000 in this district. And I assure you it's a great deal. So keep that in mind as you're considering it. But all of these rates that are shown in this table do not include that 0.2 exoneration allowance. So The real estate intangible rates are identical. So the compensating rate is 57.5 cents. The 4% increase tax rate is 59.8 cents. So it's not significantly different. It's 2.3 cents different. Subsection 1 is significantly higher. And then the House Bill 940, you can see, is significantly lower. So the range is 50.9 cents to 66.7 cents that could be adopted with the and still be within the normal range. I will point out at this point that the advertisement that is in the paper this week, or will be, as well as next week, that advertisement is no longer required according to advice we've received from the Kentucky Department of Education. We are continuing to put it in the paper because we want to be transparent and let people know, we're not trying to pull up at your level or at my level, at Dr. Foster's level, but we are communicating that. And because we have to communicate what the board may do, we so just, I don't know if I pointed that out last year, but it's not a something but it's just to let people know what the rate could be.
So I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So if we decide on the 4% increase and we add on the 2 cents, basically we're in the same spot, 60 point, would it be 60.1 or 60 point, or,
Last year was 60.1
okay,
and this year would be 60.0.
okay.
And it's the 2/10 exoneration would only take it up to 60.0.
Okay.
So it would be a decrease actually
Okay.
from what was adopted last year. Am I?
Greg, out of all of those 4 options on the screen, subsection 1 and then House Bill 940, those 2 are recallable. The top 2 are not.
I believe your subsection 1 would be recallable because it's higher than the 4%.
Okay.
There would be nothing that's recallable about the House Bill 940 because it's always going to be lower than any other rate that you see on a chart like this.
Explain the recallable.
Recallable, if let's say the board were to properly advertise and adopt a rate higher than 4%, because if you intend to levy a tax rate higher than the 4%, you are required to advertise. So if you are going to levy a rate higher than the 4% rate, then members in the community, taxpayers in the community could do filing with the county clerk's office and open a petition, seek to get the appropriate number of signatures, and once they have been certified that they meet the requirement, then there's a time frame for a recall vote. And so, there are different options open to the school district then, or to the Board of Education. If the board chooses to move forward with the rate higher than the 4% rate, it can do that. But if the recall petition succeeds, then the board is responsible for paying for the cost of reprinting tax bills. The board can choose to adopt only the 4% rate and then choose to send a supplemental bill for the amount above the 4% increase rate if the recall petition fails. So, it is costly to reprint tax bills, obviously, and I've never actually seen that done where a recall petition was successful and a board move forward with it.
Wasn't it unsuccessful at JC in Louisville?
No, actually,
It
they,
was,
they ruled that the petition was not.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, so it didn't go on, it didn't move forward,
That's
did it?
correct.
Mhm.
That's correct. Yeah, I think they had some
The
issues with
signatures or something.
addresses and signatures. That's correct. Yeah, it was a mess.
How many districts are there total in the state? Just for-
171.
Mhm.
So 120 counties and 51 independents.
And do we have, it may not be readily available, so I might have to come back. I'm just curious on the levied equivalent rate. Like we're at 63.8, that's 124th in the state. I'm just curious what the lowest is. Like we clearly see the top of the range, 120, because that's right there for us. But I'm just curious, as I just compared, do we know it?
There's a document that ranks them.
Yes.
We have to get it.
Okay. Okay.
There is a district, I think the lowest district is in the mid 30s, like 35 cents. Right? What, Ludlow? Yeah, Ludlow. And of course, that's an independent. And
I think most of these that have the really low tax rate have pretty high Title I federal money coming into the district.
yeah, there may be other things like excise taxes and occupational taxes that factor into their 30% effort as well. So, let's see.
Mr. Chair, we can get the state ranking
It's
document.
okay. I was, like I said, just kind of point of reference.
And before we leave that slide, just to point out, ignoring exoneration allowances, last year's rate at 60.0 versus the 4% rate this year at 59.8 cents. That 2 cents reduction would amount to a reduction of $4 in property tax for a homeowner with a home that's valued at $200,000 in both years. So, of course, a property can be reassessed, you know, if it's that year, that owner's year, to be reassessed. You don't have any control over that. That's the PVA's area of expertise and responsibility. But as far as the rate that is levied, you know, if those two rate, if the 59.8 cent 4% increase rate were to be levied, that homeowner would see a reduction in their tax bill of approximately $4 for the school tax. All right, moving on to the next slide. We're in the home stretch now. What you see here is the impact to total revenue as well as just to the general fund revenue for various tax levy scenarios. So I do want to point out that only the top and bottom rows in this chart are true rates that the state gives us. The state gives us the compensating rate, which is the lowest. The state gives us a 4% rate, which is generally the highest. And so anything between there, I'm interpolating what those rates would be, as well as what the revenue realized by those rates would be. So it's not carved in stone what those are, but just so that you know that. So levying the compensating rate would mean a difference of $437 lost or foregone versus levying the 4% rate. So I'm looking at the $556,000 at the bottom right corner versus the $118,000 additional revenue to the general fund that would come from the compensating rate. So that is a recurring lost revenue. I want to be clear on that, that's not just a one-time loss, because there's a compounding effect. To put that in perspective, for instance, with the salary increases that were approved for this year, the general fund portion of that was a little over $830,000. And that is a recurring cost that will be incurred by the school district going forward. So a loss of $437,000 would mean that has to be made up some other way.
Greg, on that slide, can you explain the difference between far right-hand side, additional total revenue, and additional projected general fund revenue? What makes the far right-hand column higher?
I would have to go back and look at, you may have stumped me there. I'd have to go back and look at my calculations that I did a few days ago.
Okay.
I don't know. It might be. I'll have to check into that, and I'll
Okay.
get back to you on that.
Obviously, I like the column to the right better.
Absolutely.
Because the next to last column is just the difference between that row and the row above it.
Yes.
And each succeeding row goes back to the top row. So the 39,000 is coming from 11,317 minus 11,278.
278. Correct.
And then 11,376 minus 11,278 is the 98,000.
Yeah, I think the 118,000 is the additional revenue that would result if the compensating rate were adopted. So that's the minimum additional revenue that would come into the district with the compensating rate. And as Mr. Truitt mentioned, for each line that is adopted further, there is an addition, and the 118,000 added to the 451,000 on the bottom row is where the 556 comes from. So the compensating rate is going to produce what appears to be additional revenue. It is, but it's not all because of, it's not all, the numbers that you apply that rate against are not apples and apples. They're slightly different in the new year as well and produce that additional revenue. So, any other questions? All right. This next slide deals with moving away from property tax revenue as we typically think of it, and moving to a few other areas that the board needs to make a determination on. So the first is the motor vehicle tax rate. I went back in history last year, and I could get as far back as 2003, 2004, and that rate has been set at 56 cents for all of the years then to present. 56 cents is the maximum that is still allowed by the state for us to, for the board to levy for the motor vehicle tax rate. That maximum has not changed during that time. It's not like it's gone up to a higher number and the board has chosen to leave it at 56. It has always been at 56 during that time frame. Likewise, the utility tax rate cannot be set higher than 3%. And going back during that same time frame, it has been set at 3%. Of course, this is what is added on water bills, electric bills, and other things like that. The last thing is the taxation or the exemption of aircraft and watercraft. And I could not get as far back on that. The records did not go back that far, and the state's records don't go back that far for us. But almost as far back, that has been exempted. And you may think, well, shouldn't everybody pay their fair share? And if there's the potential for taxing aircraft or watercraft, or inventory transfers, those are all lumped together. should that not be the case? Seek has an equalizing factor. So if property tax revenue goes up, seek revenue will go down. And it is almost a one-to-one impact. It's not exact, but it is approximately so much so that the repercussion of the benefit, I should say, of having aircraft and watercraft in this community, whether it be from residents or people coming in for a visit for whatever reason, there is a benefit to the community for money that they might spend in the community that would perhaps make it wise to continue to exempt that from taxation, since the net result of the revenue is going to be 0%. So, well, anyway, the no recommendations from the superintendent tonight, but no action on the agenda for the board tonight. We really wanted to clear up any questions or answer any questions that you might have. Are there any questions that we haven't already addressed?
Mr. Murphy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm done. I just said, good, thank you.
So what
Thank
Mr. Murphy did last year, and I'm assuming you guys would want a similar format on the night that we vote for our tax rate, he will do a tax hearing at the beginning of our board meeting. And so that will be an opportunity for folks to come and speak. I think last year we had one or two. So it will be kind of a condensed highlights of what we just walked through. And then, we'll talk about a recommendation from that point. So if you have any other suggestions or questions. Okay.
I think that every year helps the people who come and the people who watch.
Sure.
It's hard to understand.
Yes,
even,
it is.
You know, it gets easier year by year, but
Thank you,
Okay.
Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy.
Okay, move on to B, construction management.
Yes, so we wanted to take an opportunity tonight. There is a presentation and a possible action to talk about construction management. I know a couple of you have been on the board for a long time, a couple of you are newer. I know for me, this was a newer topic. One of the things when Sherman Carter Barnhart talked to us about our bids and our options, one of the small pieces of information in there was the idea of construction management, which is an alternative to using a general contractor. So really, to learn about that, Mr. Rucker and I would use the word immersed and then some for the last couple of weeks, and really talk to other districts, other superintendents. We talked to a couple construction managers, and we started with Sherman Carter Barnhart, really start to understand it. The projects at Spencer County Elementary, Spencer County Middle School are unique. They're not flashy. They're not new buildings. They're not something that a general contractor or an architect is going to put on the front page of the website. They are truly intended to extend the life of those schools. But as we all know, they were way too expensive. So we've got to find a way to look at that. So Mr. Rucker is going to talk to you guys this evening about really what is construction management, some of the pros and cons and considerations. Justin is here and can kind of talk to you about their perspective if you need. And then we put an action on, if you guys are ready to go forth and comfortable, some options to start to look at having construction managers, in a sense, put in their interest to do so formally. So whether or not we do that tonight, that's going to be completely up to you guys. It's interesting. I've learned a lot. It was surprising to me how many districts use construction management. But it was also interesting to kind of hear their take and why and all those kinds of things. We tried to package that together. Mr. Rucker is going to kind of talk us through it. So, Mr. Rucker, the floor is yours, sir.
Well, good evening, friends. First, I'd like to point out that I noticed Finance sprung for color copies for their presentation. I have black and white ones. You take that as you will. But as we go through, we do just kind of want to have a discussion about what this looks like. I think an understatement would be to say that we were all rather disappointed with how our initial round of bids went. trying to use a general contractor model. And so since then, Mr. Prather, myself, Dr. Foster, we've been kind of working phones. We've entertained some different contractors out at the site to really just ask them what makes a project really attractive for you to come out and bid on those things. And as we started to have those conversations over and over again, people would ask us, well, have you ever thought about doing a construction manager instead of a GC? And so the real answer to that was no, we hadn't. So when we sit down and we really started to have that conversation with some of the folks in the field, it sparked our interest. Dr. Foster, I know, made extensive use of his contacts at KASS and KASA to gather and poll different superintendents around us. Mr. Prather and I made some contacts in our field at equivalent places around. And so we have just put together a couple of things that we want you guys to look at. And then we'll move forward with questions and answers. And hopefully, Justin, if you have anything for him, he's here and ready to rock and roll and give us his best guess here. So where we are, we have clearly rejected our original general contractor. We've met with Sherman Carter Barnhart and begun to reestablish a new timeline for the project that'll take us forward moving from here. In the month of August, we want to work with you all to determine whether or not we're comfortable in a general contractor model or whether or not we want to move to a construction management model with this entire project. Or whether there are pieces of it we want to keep in a GC, but other pieces we want to move into construction management. Hopefully, once we have a better idea of where we feel comfortable with that, then in September, we would work with Sherman Carter Barnhart and either the construction manager or just our internal folks with repackaging the bid in September, hoping in October to have the bids back out on the street. And then in the November work session, being able to open bids and give you all a real clear picture of where the new bids look like compared to what the old bids came in through. And then in November, around that Thanksgiving meeting, we're hoping to be able to award contracts or be able to make a recommendation so that in November you could award a contract, and then we could spend January, February, and March really scheduling what work can look like here on our campus as we move forward together. This time, even though it's been disappointing, has certainly given us an opportunity to look at different options. It certainly gave us the opportunity to think outside the box and really pushed us in some directions that we hadn't considered before, which I think may be more fortuitous for us in the future as we move forward. And we've made, like I said, extensive use of our telephones and our gifts of gab to make sure that we're pulling in the best information for you all as we move forward. So first, I just want to kind of talk about what are the things that are similar between a general contractor and a construction manager. Both of them will be overall responsible. Both of them have overall responsibility for the projects as we move forward. Their primary objective is to get the project completed on time and within budget. They both require a lot of in-depth understanding of the project. They both need the abilities to manage their budgets. They both have the abilities to manage a schedule and also to may be the single most important thing, to manage resources. Right now, a lot of our supply chains have recovered from COVID, but we still are seeing 6, 8, 9 month backlogs on HVAC equipment, which is a huge focus of this project. And then just looking at the realities of how long it takes to drill a 400-foot deep geothermal well when we are projected to drill 170 of them. So as you start to manage all of those things together and really put that into perspective, whether we go GC or GM or CM, we're going to be in a place where we need somebody who has strong resource management. And then they have to be capable of working with subcontractors and vendors to give us information that we need so that you all feel like we're moving in the right direction and we're making good, wise decisions with the taxpayers' money. The next slide talks about the differences between the general contractor model and the construction manager. So generally speaking here, a general contractor manages the overall project. He hires all of the subs. He hires all the folks under it. And we have very little input on how that really looks. And we saw that really glaringly in our negotiation phase with Ridley when it was very difficult for us to get to that base pricing that we needed to see. On the other hand, once if you move forward with hiring a construction manager, the construction manager coordinates with us and bids each individual piece of the project out so that we know who he's bidding, what their bids are, and what their prices are on each individual aspect of the project. and you can take A, B, and C and reject D and tell them to go back and try again and keep the project moving without having to stop the entire project because of one small piece of a bad bid. The general contractor performs work at a set cost that's determined by KDE schedule. The construction manager works in a very similar way. The Kentucky Department of Education has a schedule of costs that they can attribute to you guys as we move forward. So as far as paying them, it's really not a huge difference one way to the other of how we look at that. On a construction general contractor, you have a single point of contact. So no matter what goes wrong, we know we have one guy we get to go fuss at, or one guy we get to come in here and tell you he's the greatest guy that ever lived. On a general contractor model, we have a much greater sense of control over that. Instead of having to go through a general contractor who then goes to a sub, who then goes to a vendor, we have the ability with the construction manager to go straight to the vendor themselves and communicate with them our needs, what we have disappointments in, what are the things that we have been encouraged by, and really get into that work with them more on side by side. The general contractor model, I think we saw a very good example of what happens when a general contractor builds in defensive costs into the overall project. They can hide those costs in different places that we don't ever get to see. When we look at a construction manager model, it gives us the opportunity to really get into each and every single one of those contracts that goes out so we can see where all of our dollars are going and flowing. The general contractor assumes responsibility for almost every aspect of the project. With a construction manager, we would have more responsibility inside your district office, but that also comes with that greater flexibility and transparency as we move forward so that we can keep you all in a better sense, knowing what's going on, where your dollars that you're stewarding are flowing, and how fast the project should or should not be moving at that time. The next slide just kind of talks about a few pros and cons. And I would tell you, depending upon the project, I think this is a very different decision for the ELC project than it is for Spencer County Elementary and Spencer County Middle School. The scope and the sequence of events that have to happen at ELC made it very ideal, in my opinion, from what I've learned at this point, for a general contractor model. It's a small scope. We have somebody who we have fairly large sense of familiarity with. We have a trusted contractor that's come in with us that we know we can work with. On the other side, as I look more and more at the Spencer County Elementary, Spencer County Middle School project, I see more and more doors opening for the pros of the construction managers. Let's just take a quick look through those pros and cons. In your general contractor, you've got that single point of contact. They manage all of your subs. You get a single price. And then the owners, you have very limited time that we have to spend on that project. They're going to come and give us updates, but at the end of the day, it's all in that GC's hands. The cons on that is that you don't have a lot of control over your subs. You have less transparency of what time is being spent on and where tax dollars are headed. And as we have seen, we have very limited negotiating power in the GC model. It's essentially a take it or leave it kind of deal. On the construction management side of the house, you have an increased amount of control. You have transparency in the pricing. You have an increased ability to negotiate. You have a great expertise in project management with a focus on coordinating the project itself instead of trying to, work with all the things in the background. And the construction manager comes on board earlier in the project. So as we if you decide to go construction management, we would bring them on board prior to repackaging the bids so that they could have input on what things can go together, what sequences we should bid, and in what time frames we should do so. They have a percentage cost, and they do increase the amount of time we spend bidding individual pieces of this project as it moves out. But again, you trade that off with some transparency and the ability to negotiate forward with those burdens.
Can I interject one thought there before we get into the selection of a construction manager? One of the things in meeting with Justin that he shared with us, which I think is important for you guys to hear, in an ideal situation, if construction management were something that a school board and district were more comfortable with, typically what would happen in order is we would select an architect and then select a construction manager who would be involved at the design step. So obviously right now that ship has sailed. We have the design. We will go back to that design, but we won't completely redesign. So that's something I know Mr. Rucker and we got a chance to sit down with two companies, and both of them said that happens. There are districts that back up and punt. They go through the bidding process. The bids are way too high. They back up, and if they utilize our services, we get to be at the table to some degree. But it would be different from the norm had we selected construction management from the very beginning of the project. So I just wanted to share that with you. Justin, I don't know if you would explain that any better or differently than I did, but.
So they have what they call pre-construction services.
Mhm.
And in addition to the percentage that Mr. Rucker discussed there, the prescribed percentage that KDE sets forth, they also have pre-construction services that you would typically pay them in addition to that percentage.
Yeah.
So they would be involved more from conception, and especially the projects like we're discussing where phasing is critical. We've got kids in the building, the contractors have to be able to move around. That's where the benefit of construction management comes in. They can start to discuss the schedule and think about how things are going together, how they intend to build and tackle the project, so that that's all factored into the construction schedule as well. Because at the end of the day, time is money. So all these guys, in addition to material, they're considering their labor costs, and they're considering how much time it's going to take to move through the building and complete any given scope. So
Justin, do you remember, were you here when Spencer County decided not to go with a construction manager and just pay a small percentage to the architects to do that? That was before your time?
yeah, so as long as I've been here since 2003, it's always been general contractor.
Yes, we went that way.
And that was the middle school project.
Yes, the middle school was the first job that we began. That was on the heels, I think, of Spencer County Elementary, the first time it was built.
Thanks.
So should the board be interested in moving forward and entertaining construction management as a possibility for us, there are three ways we can go about entertaining proposals from them. One, we can do formal bids through Sherman Carter Barnhart. They can set out different aspects of services that we would want. They can put those out on the street and bring those back with interested parties and advertise those for us to come back and do the bid process, which is somewhat similar to what we've seen in the GC. We can do a request for proposal model where we can put out the state model proposal and have folks come in. Then we take those proposals, vet them through what the state's proposed model is, and then make a decision based upon what we receive if we want to move forward. Or we can use model procurement, which are folks that have already gone through a lot of that vetting. We can entertain three of them by sending them requests for proposals specifically. They can send those back to us, and then we would either go through an interview process or a selection process determined by the board to be able to bring you the best candidate. So we have options no matter which way you guys decide you want to go. So where do we go from here? Tonight, in the action portion of this meeting, we're going to ask you to allow us to use model procurement to seek out firms who have already been vetted, who have already been proven, and to authorize Dr. Foster to put together an interview committee to start talking to some of those folks and learning more about construction management as we go through and what services they can offer and what costs that might look like for the district. In the interim, between now and the next August meeting, we would do our level best to get three of them in here to talk to them, to make sure that we are confident in how we want to move forward, and then bring you on the 26th a recommendation, either stay with GC or to say, you know what, after the interview process, we feel like this construction manager is worth a little bit of extra money that can really get this project back on pace for us and help us to make sure that we're putting 20 to 30 years of life back into these new buildings, back into these buildings as we move forward. And with that, if you have any questions, my friend Justin is right over here.
Well, I think in the past, we've often considered the architects as our construction manager, even though you weren't, so it might be best to go this route too.
How do you feel working with construction managers? What's
I've
your
talked to
experience?
Dr. Foster about this. I think, especially on the heels of COVID, kind of coming out of the pandemic and some of the challenges that we all face from that, it's becoming more and more popular for districts, I think, to utilize construction managers. And the biggest benefit, if you're asking for my opinion, is that much like working with an architect as a professional service, you guys get to hand pick who you want to have the responsibility of managing the construction timeline and for truly managing the construction side. As an architect, the only thing that I can do is withhold money.
Right.
I have no power over the schedule. I can't control the contractor. I don't have it. You guys have with the GC model right now, you guys have one contract with the general contractor, and ultimately he either performs or he doesn't perform. All I can do is withhold money and pay him when stuff is completed. But that's really the only stick I have. With a construction manager, they're going to be much more hands-on in working through the construction process on your all's behalf. Much, if you looked at it like a tree, if you will, much like we have a direct contract with you, the construction manager is going to be another independent resource for you guys to work through. The biggest benefit, again, is instead of a low bid process where the guy on bid day, whoever it is, Joe Smith Contracting, whoever's low, that's who you get, and you may or may not like who you're working with. They may or may not manage construction well. They're just low on bid day. And outside of some abnormal issue where you can challenge that, typically you're going to work with whoever's low. Construction manager, you get to hand pick who gets the select or who's going to work on your off behalf. So that's one of the biggest benefits of a CE.
What, in your opinion, what's the biggest drawback of that?
So I think it's going to result for more paperwork. Things, for instance. So let's say we're all going through the project and nobody likes change orders, but change orders happen.
Right.
Well, this CM, instead of having one price that you might have from a GC, he could break this thing up into 15 bid packages.
Right.
Well, one change on a construction site could impact 3 or 4 bid packages. So instead of one change order to that one general contractor,
Yeah.
you guys could see 3 or 4 change orders. Right. The price is the price, but it impacts, so it can often result in a little more paperwork. There was a time construction managers used to sell their services because that's the only way that districts could take advantage of the tax exempt material. So now we do that anyway. Even with GC projects, we break out the direct purchase orders and you guys save the taxes on that material. So it's not unlike that. So we're kind of in a hybrid model anyway nowadays because you guys have contract with the GC, but you also have individual contracts with material vendors that are essentially, it's very similar to that. So we can change orders now. You might see from time to time, it'll impact the GC's contract,
Yeah.
but you might also have a change order to a material direct purchase order. So
Right.
it's similar to that. But districts that we have seen so Warren County, for example, in 2007, I think they had a bad experience with the general contractor. The next projects they actually had simultaneously. They tried CM on one, they kept GC on another.
Yeah.
And they basically, one of the biggest changes to them was really, wait a minute, what's all this paperwork and why are we seeing all these change orders? It can, just looking at the volume of those change orders, you can initially say, well, I'm not sure this was a good decision. But it's just because it's a little bit different process and a little bit different in that it's multiple contracts instead of one contract.
So it's more work for central office, but not necessarily for us.
It can be, yes.
But it's more transparent, right? I mean, we get to see exactly
So
who's doing what.
to me, the trade-off of doing additional paperwork is worth being able to see those individual bid prices. I think we all kind of reflect back on what we just walked through and realize that the base bids are where we had our biggest conundrum with our last GC. Being able to get into those base bids with your construction manager, look at those things with them and make our way through them. Yes, we're going to do additional paperwork. Yes, it's going to take us some additional time, but with modest remuneration from you guys, I'm sure Mr. Murphy and Mr. Prather and myself will find a way to do that out of the goodness of our heart and make sure that this project rolls forward as it should. So, but I do think the trade-off is real, but I think it's worth it for our kids in the long run.
When you think about transparency, it goes back to, at the end of the day, the GC model, we're really just depending on them to share information. We can't see it. We just get the information we're given. But when these bid packages are broken out, you're going to see numbers for mechanical, for plumbing, for electrical, and each one of those packages should have multiple bids typically so that you can evaluate each one of them and select and award each one of those individually. And if you get, like Mr. Rucker said earlier, if you get an anomaly, the construction manager says, I think that electrical price doesn't look right. Maybe it's high. You can award everything but that, rebid that piece, and keep moving forward.
I will piggyback off that. Actually, an exact example. One of the reputable construction managers that we've had a chance to sit down with just to get an overview of what construction management is Alliance. So they're doing a project down in Simpson County, which is an auditorium project. And the superintendent there told me it was a $7 million project, not a huge project, not a tiny project, but their electrical bid came in really high. So they were able to accept everything but electrical, and they had to work on electrical for a couple more months. And they literally cut it in half. And he said, but had they not been able to, the whole thing was in jeopardy. In a small county, the fact that the electrical was twice as much as they had projected, put the whole project in question. But they were really able to pinpoint and specifically address of the electrical price and cost and get it down to where they could afford it. And so that was heartening to hear. So that was one of
And
the.
sometimes, like we're asking a GC, they're taking some risk, if you will, because they're having to project where costs are going to be over the entire schedule of that project. So sometimes, like the electrical result that Dr. Foster shared there, sometimes delaying the package, just one specific piece, can have a tremendous benefit because it takes the guesswork out of the game. Guys are saying, oh, I don't know if I can get switchgear, so I'm going to upcharge that $100,000 because I'm taking the risk. Whereas if they delay it and get it closer where they know they can actually get the material, they know they don't have a supply chain issue, then you can take advantage of that and the cost of it.
So, Michelle, if you don't mind to go back a couple slides, and when I mentioned the action that we can take tonight, and if I'm more than willing to make the recommendation if you guys want to, move on it or not, we can talk through that. But if you go to the one more back, Michelle. No, down one.
Number 6.
Can you put that one into so we can see it? So really looking at the three options of how do you get to selecting a construction manager. So obviously, just like architect services, you guys can choose the process, what it looks like. You can choose to interview them, whatever you choose to do. The one thing that I can tell you that I learned quickly, there appears to be about 2 to 3 big names and games in town, and that's across the state. So really, when you look at that, if you look at the far right option, that model procurement, that allows this board essentially through me to reach out to those companies directly and say, we would love for you to submit a proposal and for you guys to consider those proposals. Most shared within 7 to 14 days, they would have that back to us. And so if you're wondering why did we pick that side or that option, that's kind of where it came from. Essentially, everybody that I talked to, really it was 2, and there's a third game in town. So our goal would be through Justin's advice to kind of solicit those 3 businesses, tell them what we're doing, and seek, their proposals, to work with us. And so from there, you guys would have some options to talk about at the August meeting if we can get it done that quick. So that's kind of why we landed there. I just wanted to explain that to you. The other two would be similar to if we really didn't have an architect in mind, if we didn't have, somebody in mind, we would probably start at either formal bidding or request for proposals. The request for proposals is, if I understand it correctly, is more like if you just throw out a bid in hopes of general contracting, in hopes that comes in good, and you just don't know who's going to bid or actually submit a proposal. Where on the model procurement side, you're essentially asking individual companies to bid.
You're already kind of handpicking people that are groups that have proved themselves.
That are reputable and doing
Yes.
good work with districts. Yes.
in that one.
Yes, that's
And
correct.
it seems to me that it's just, you're paying for more hands on deck that are not tied to anybody else, to architects or to the builders in any way. They're only tied to us.
That
So-
is correct.
So
Yeah.
their whole focus should be coming in the cheapest and on time,
Mhm.
where you actually have bodies going out and do that. I think sometimes in the past, we've been stretched thin and didn't have the thumb on it all the time.
There is one element to construction management that Mr. Rucker didn't put in his presentation, because really multiple districts mentioned this to us, but I don't know that in fairness to you guys that we could build it into this. But there are avenues where construction management can help us solicit grants, state funding, things sometimes that you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes multiple districts mentioned that to us as we asked and called and picked up the phone, that construction managers really helped make projects affordable because they were able to find some stuff. I don't know that would be a fit for this project, but it would be nice for us to try the process and the use of
That's right.
construction management. And then down the road, as we look at new schools or major renovation to maybe the high school, to be able to take advantage of that. So caught my attention.
And like Justin had talked about in the Warren County model, moving through, you have a general contractor right now who'll be working through the ELC project. You will have, if you choose to go down that route, a construction manager on the other campus. It would give you the opportunity to field test those things while you're running them both at the same time to see which one you have a comfort level with as we really start to look down the road. I mean, I don't think it's any, there's no denying that both of our elementary schools and our high school are over capacity. We're going to build something in the next 5 years. Now, what that something is, we have a lot of discussion to go through. But this would give you as a board the opportunity to test drive both of those models at the same time to decide which pony you want to ride into the future.
All right. Thank you, sir. Any other questions from Mr. Rucker or Justin? Justin, thank you for being here, sir. It's good to see you.
Okay, let's move on to action with discussion. Back to approval of the construction invoice.
Yes. At each board meeting, we'll be presenting pay applications and proposal from contractors who are working on their projects. So you can see we have two pay applications, one from Kentucky State Treasurer, which is for a permit on our ELC project, and from Lynn Imaging for drawings and hosting. And also two proposals directly from Sherman Carter Barnhart, one for next door in our old cafeteria, also known as the Family Empowerment Center, and then for the ELC HVAC drawings.
Okay, is this your recommendation?
My recommendation is to approve the payment of both pay applications and proposals as presented.
Do I have a motion as stated?
I'll make-
Aaron? Tim, second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Nobody there. Unanimous. And now on to the real estate purchase.
Yes, so on July 8th, we had a special called board meeting to authorize the purchase of property, which is 106 Reeser Avenue. And we've made an offer on that property for the purchase price of $235,000. It was accepted. Kentucky Department of Education kindly gave us quite a list of things that we had to do with the title opinion, a commitment to title insurance, a copy of the plat, roadway adequacy letter from our city, potential environmental and safety hazards letter, schematic site plan, an appraisal, and proposed purchase agreement. So we have successfully gotten all that submitted to KDE and received their approval to move forth with a closing and actual transfer and purchase of the property. So we will work with Charlie Tishner on that. We will use capital funds request for the entire purchase of the property. I think that's it. Any questions?
Comments, Julie? And our exact recommendation is?
To authorize myself and Board Chair Clevenger to set a closing date with the Maple family in Charlie Tishner's office to purchase property at 106 Reeser Avenue, Taylorsville, Kentucky, 40071 for the sum of $235,000 plus closing cost, and proceed with the execution of that purchase as determined by the board in its July 8th meeting.
And to authorize Mr. Murphy.
And to authorize Mr. Murphy and Board Chair Clevenger to complete and sign the capital funds request for KDE.
Do I have a motion to state it?
I'll make that motion as stated.
Lynn, do I have a second? Pam? All in favor? Unanimous? Now let's move back to consider approval of construction management.
Yeah, so this action, literally, we would be completely fine with going forth, or we can go forward, or we can pause and get more information. So again, our thinking, as I shared on that last slide, was to work with Sherman Carter Barnhart to pinpoint 3 reputable construction managers, do due diligence to interview and meet with them, and bring to you a recommendation to use a construction manager on the Spencer County Middle, Spencer County Elementary project. And once that happens, we would go back to the design step in the month of September to get that back on the street for bids. October-ish.
Any comments or concerns or? Yeah, I'd like to go ahead and get it moving because we already are behind. So was that your recommendation?
Recommendation would be to use model procurement to solicit 3 construction managers and bring back to the board at our regular August board meeting.
Okay, do we have a motion as stated?
I'll make the motion as stated.
Tim, do we have a second? Pam? All in favor? Unanimous? Keep looking over there. There's nobody there. Okay, it is now 6:23. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll make that motion.
Lynn? A second? Pam? All in favor? Unanimous? Good night, everyone.
I do too. I was going to tell you.
It was nice, Greg.
They look good.